Welcome to Casper College's Wheeler Concert Hall. I am Roy Cohey. I serve as treasurer of the Casper College Board of Trustees. We are pleased to co-sponsor tonight's debate in partnership with the Casper Star-Tribune for candidates for Wyoming's Superintendent of Public Instruction. It is my pleasure to introduce our two candidates. They will be introduced and seated from the audience's left to right in alphabetical order. First, please make welcome Republican candidate Jillian Balow. Thank you. Also, please make welcome Democratic candidate Mike Ceballos. Thank you. I will now turn this evening's event over to our moderator, Jason Adrians, editor of the Casper Star-Tribune. Jason.
Thank you. Good evening and welcome to the 2014 Superintendent of Public Instruction debate sponsored by Casper College and the Casper Star-Tribune. Tonight's debate will feature the following components. Both candidates will have the opportunity to make an opening statement that shall not exceed 2 minutes in length. After the opening statements, the candidates will answer questions from the Casper Star-Tribune editorial board and readers of the Casper Star-Tribune on the Department of Education, relationships in education, testing and standards, and other topics of interest. The candidate who receives a question will not have more than 2 minutes to respond, and the other candidate will have 1 minute for a rebuttal. Questions will alternate between the two candidates. After the initial question and answer period, we'll ask each candidate 2 follow-up questions. The candidate will have no more than 1 minute to respond, and the other candidate will have the opportunity for a 1 minute rebuttal. The debate will conclude with each candidate having the opportunity to make a closing statement that shall not exceed 2 minutes in length. As we progress through the debate, members of the audience are encouraged to use the pens and paper available to them and write down possible follow-up questions based on things the candidates have said here tonight. If you have a follow-up question ready, please raise your hand and an usher will come collect the question from you. Once again, we appreciate you holding your applause until the end of the event. Also, please remember to be respectful of the candidates who have chosen to participate in tonight's event. Based on results of a pre-debate coin flip, Ms. Balow, you will make the first opening statement of the night. Ms. Balow, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Casper College. Thank you, Casper Star-Tribune, for having me here tonight. Thank you all for taking the time to come out tonight and listen to the candidates speak, and thank you to all of those who are following on social media. Wyoming has an opportunity to make a clean break from the past. In education, that's a past that's been embroiled in controversy and in stagnation for the past several years. I am that clean break from the past for 2 reasons: experience and philosophy. I have a bachelor's degree and a master's degree in education. I spent 10 years teaching in Wyoming classrooms in some of our smallest schools and some of our largest schools. I've been in state government leadership for the last 8 years, where I worked at the Department of Education side by side with school districts across the state on school improvement efforts and literacy. I worked at the governor's office, where I was a local government policy advisor, and again worked shoulder to shoulder with communities on economic development and was a liaison to the SLIB. I've been at the Department of Family Services for the last 2 years, where I am an executive administrator of a large staff and a large budget. Philosophy. Philosophy about education is deeply personal. As a mother, a teacher, and a leader, I know that it's the primary right and responsibility of parents and children to make the most important decisions about education. But ladies and gentlemen, make no mistake, your ability to control education is in jeopardy. We see the federal government overstepping in state and local control in every facet, every day in Wyoming. And Wyoming needs a leader who will put 18 years of experience to work on day one and fight federal intrusion, streamline bureaucracy, and make government work better. Thank you.
Mr. Ceballos.
Good evening. Thanks again for the Casper Star and Casper College for doing this. I appreciate the opportunity to be here, and thanks to all of you as well. I decided not too long ago that one of the best ways I could spend my time on this campaign is to tour all 48 school districts and to start having conversations. With those conversations, I've heard a lot, and let me start talking to you a little bit about that. I've been talking to parents, and parents have been telling me that they are really frustrated because they want our system to do better, but we've just been embroiled in arguments. And what they've said is, Mike, we really like the fact that you've run a business for so many years. We think you can really help bring us out of that. I've talked to teachers. Teachers are also saying what's really frustrating about this is that the rules constantly change. We're doing the best we can, but we need some stability in our system. And Mike, you have those skills. You have administrative skills that we've seen and we've talked to you about. And we're delighted that we can have someone that can come into the department and work with them as well as all of us. I've also talked to administrators in local school districts and at our department. And they've also said, Mike, what we really need with this new job is an ability to have someone that knows how to work with our legislature and to work with us, because it's clear we need a vision for education in Wyoming and someone that's willing to represent the entire state to try to articulate that. I've talked with business people, and businesses have said, Mike, you've been in a work environment for 30 years. You were president of Quest for 14. We think your administrative skills will definitely help move us forward. But the issues that we're going to have to work on are how do you work with those boards as well. I'm really pleased to be here and then look forward this evening to be able to have a conversation with all of you.
Thank you. The first topic tonight will be inside the Wyoming Department of Education. And Ms. Balo, the first question is for you, and it's something you alluded to in your opening statements. I think it's fair to say that those at the Department of Education have faced dysfunctional leadership over the past few years. How do you restore a positive culture at the department? What needs to be done to heal the Wyoming Department of Education?
Thanks for that question, and you're absolutely right. I still have colleagues that I worked with who weathered the storm over the last couple of years and continue to work and function at the Department of Education. The first thing that needs to happen is to empower those talented folks that are there to do their job and to provide robust technical assistance and use the expertise that they have. The second job that I'll face when entering office is to recruit and retain some of the very best educators and some of the very best leaders across the state. That'll look a lot of different ways. I want to reinstate the teachers cabinet. I want to start new cabinets of folks across the state who will provide unfiltered information to the department. I want to borrow teachers and educators from across the state and bring them in. That's a model that's worked well in other states. And again, get that unfiltered information from the school districts as well as tap that knowledge to build the collective capacity of the Department of Education. So recruiting, retaining, and empowering are the ways that we make the Department of Education function as an agency that provides a robust and expert support system to school districts. I've done that. I've led in challenging times. I am an administrator of a complex organization now that was reorganized and merged. A year ago, I furloughed 17 of my staff members and made those calls personally. There are some challenging times, certainly, with personnel. I have the administrative experience. I have the leadership experience to make that happen.
Mr. Ceballos, your response.
Thanks. I was waiting for the clock to go to 1 here. I didn't want to cheat or anything on this. So one of the things we have to really understand is the department has gone through a hard time. There's been 5 leaders in 4 years in that. And whenever you think about any business that you've been in, can you imagine that kind of change? Part of the opportunity that I've had for the last 18 years is to work with folks at the department. And what they're really asking for is to trust us, believe in us, work with us. That's part of the challenge that's going to be there. How do you tell a department that we're going to now start settling in and try to focus on the work. And what's going to give us the best opportunity is when you can provide those answers. We've been talking to the districts about one of the ways to grow capacity, and we're going to ask for the districts to provide what we're calling loaned executives, people from districts, from the college, from the university to come in and help develop the capacity and support those folks that are there. They're looking for great leadership, and they just want a chance to contribute.
Thank you. Mr. Ceballos, the second question is for you. Do you think the Wyoming Department of Education currently is too large? Why or why not?
We just began a discussion actually a couple of days ago. The superintendent invited both of us to come in and to talk to her, and so I've spent some time in the office. And one of the questions that I asked about is what was the size of the staffing? Where are you today? Where have you been in the past? And what it appears to be, or at least the information that's been provided, is that the staffing levels are not that different from when the Department of Education was assumed by our current superintendent. The question that we have to ask is really, are we using those folks to the best of their ability? The current superintendent has decided to fill those positions and is working to do that today, so I think the size is going to be there. What we have to ask, however, is how do we compress? Because what the department has become known for with our districts is really compliance, that's the work that they've been doing. The shift we need to work on here is how do we change that? How do we do it? How do we reduce the amount of time? If your resource is this big, how do you squish in the compliance so that the main job that you have is asking how do you support those districts? I do think that the size of the staff has been depleted. I do think the fact that we can add back up staffing level will give us the opportunity to really support our school districts. And in any job that I've been in, if what you do is simply are checking and you're not helping, you're minimizing the opportunity for the staff to provide support to the districts, and that's what our job is. My customer, the person I serve, has to be the district because they're closest to the work. And the important work of a school is working with a student, a teacher, and their parents and trying to figure out how to deliver that. And I think we need to have more of our staff there so we are fully ready to be able to engage our districts and provide the support they need.
Ms. Balo, your rebuttal.
Okay, thank you. This is what I know. I worked at the Department of Education until mid-2011, and I can say that the staffing was adequate to fulfill the purposes at the time. I don't know what the staffing levels are now. I understand that there are vacancies. I understand there are vacancies that are being filled, but this is what I'll do. First of all, I'll talk to the employees and ask them where the gaps are. Ask them, when we have our vision to provide stellar support and customer service to the stakeholders in education, what do they need to be successful at that? Then, I've proposed having an education summit with many partners in education. Ask where have the gaps been over the past 10 years, or excuse me, over the past 4 years, and what do you as stakeholders need to see from the Department of Education? And then we'll evaluate how do we deliver our customer service in a way that is adequate to all of those, for all of those needs.
Thank you. Ms. Balo, the final question in this topic is for you. What do school districts throughout Wyoming think about the Department of Education right now, and what needs to be done to improve the relationship between the department and the school districts around the state of Wyoming?
Well, one quick story. I was talking to a superintendent of one of our largest districts in the state who told me that his deputy was tracking phone calls from parents and constituents over 3.5 years' time. 7,400 and some odd calls. 4 of them went to the Department of Education. I think that's egregious. One of the main functions of the Department of Education should be to assist school districts and schools in navigating through the complexities of education at the state and federal level. So in terms of what do school districts need, they need a Department of Education that will be that support structure, that will provide that expertise and technical assistance, that will distribute adequate funding, that can answer questions about the complexities of education that can connect them to the best and informed practice, not only across our state, but across Wyoming. And I believe that, well, I was actually visiting this morning with community colleges, and a panel was asked, how does the Department of Education play into the work that you do as community colleges? And the answer was that it was laughable. It was non-existent, that the WDE was a laughing stock. Now, I know that not to be true in terms of the expertise and the knowledge that rests there, but if the outreach isn't there, that's a problem. So in terms of what we think and what we need, we know we need to be able to fulfill functions, and we know that we need to be able to conduct outreach that is adequate to building the capacity of our state education system.
Mr. Ceballos, your rebuttal.
One of the great things, again, about this campaign is the opportunity to get out and visit with the school districts. In the last 4 weeks, we've met with 28, and we're well on our way to meeting with all of them. The one issue that the districts have been talking about regularly is the fact that they have students there today. They can't wait for the arguments to be concluded. And that's arguments with the legislature, that's arguments with the department, that's arguments around. We all have a responsibility to get in there. And what's really concerning about it is they say, I've got a student today, I've got parents today, I've got administrators today that need our work. And really, we're not going to wait. We're moving forward because that's what educators do. They don't wait, they teach. And what we're finding from all of this then is that the districts are saying it is critical that we right this ship quickly because you can provide a sail instead of an anchor, and they're anxious to get on with it.
Thank you. The second topic tonight will be testing. And Mr. Ceballos, the first question in the category is for you. Up to this point, with testing standards always evolving, there's really no effective way to compare because every year seems like a base year. Assuming we want to some way compare year over year, should the Superintendent of Public Instruction have the power to mandate that state tests stay the same for a certain period of time? Why or why not?
Interestingly today, the Board of Education was talking about that very point and how can they establish it. But we've also got to understand that there's lots of folks that have influence and authority over those rules. I think that the real plan that they talked about today was stabilizing the system so that what you could do is to set standards, and right now the legislature says every 5 years those standards need to be looked at. And they were talking about having, though, an 8-year standard so that the review time would be longer. The purpose of that is because all of the work that you have to do to make that standard work, and one of that pieces of work is testing. So clearly what we need to do is to make sure that after we implement something, we let it work, and the districts are begging for that opportunity. The other issue is that the legislature just within the last couple of weeks conducted a survey, and from that, what they talked about is roles that we have to play. One of the roles that they are working on is just how do we move forward if we don't have a shared state vision. And so what we've been talking to the districts about is I see them again as my customers. They're who I serve, and we need to have those folks helping us to develop a smart set of instruction and then the tests that go with them. If we will allow the legislature, through the department working with the districts, set the North Star, the educational direction that we want to go in, I think we can then engage our school districts in talking about what are the best sets of evaluations that we can put together. How do we set those tests? What are they going to cover? Are they duplicative? And are they critical? And then let them come forward that we could then take to the legislature with a methodology and a process to make sure that our tests aren't changing all the time. We can't get there. What's the old saying? If we don't really set a path, any direction, any path will get us there. We need to have a plan.
Ms. Balo.
Here's what I know as a leader. Every functional organization has to be assessed on quality. Here's what I know as a teacher and as an educator. We need to assess two things. We need to have information about student performance and how well they're doing, and we need to have information about the health of our system. What we need to do is stop pause, and have a strong leader in the state superintendent's office to have serious and meaningful conversations about assessment. Those are happening, but there's not the leadership there to guide that conversation and to make sure that an assessment system that we have in Wyoming is coordinated and it's inclusive of formative, summative, and evaluations that serve every purpose that is needed in education. What I've proposed from the beginning is that we put a pause, no pun intended, a pause on the pause, a moratorium on the pause test for at least 3 years, no more changes, and I'm out of time.
Thank you. Ms. Balo, the next question is for you. There's an evolving trend right now in education standards, and it's conglomeration, sharing standards across states. What do you think of this trend, and at what level should standards be set?
Well, interestingly, there was a study that came out just this week, a report that came out that said 5 of those states that shared standards across states eliminated or substantially modified their standards. What that tells me is that we have some buyer's remorse about sharing standards across states without substantial state and local control. We also know from that report that opposition has increased as knowledge about the Common Core, the shared standards, has also increased. As a state, as a leader, we would be remiss not to have conversations and take a look at our standards right now as a baseline, as a starting point, but not an end point. It is clear that with our current standards, the Wyoming Content and Performance Standards that were adopted through a process and no changes in content and performance were made, that many voices were not heard in that process. People in Wyoming are upset about that. They need to be heard. That process needs to be revisited, but not at the expense of the 48 school districts that are implementing those standards every single day in every single classroom. So the fine balance will be to not cause chaos, not cause more change in the classroom, but to immediately begin a process that looks at our baseline standards, the Common Core standards as a starting point, but not an end point. What I would also like to say about standards adoption is this, that some folks also have a problem with the standards themselves. As a former English teacher, I'm one of those. It concerns me that we adopted the standards with no changes, and I would advocate and believe that an inclusive process with parents and teachers would be most helpful. Sorry, I'm out of time again.
Mr. Ceballos.
One of the challenges that we have here is you just asked in the question before, how do we keep our testing system in place? If we continue to be on the process of changing the standards, then we are going to have to change the testing system. What's been really difficult for me in this conversation is that we're so fluid in the discussion about that. And as Ms. Balo talked about it, we can't then, if we're going to have a standard that's going to work, then immediately after it's been adopted to start talking again about why it's not right and how we can move on. We can adjust, and you always adjust in a good system. You tweak it, you make sure there's work. But the idea that we've just now completed it, and for some reason in the process that we used, that we followed those rules, that it's wrong, I think is the wrong way to go. There's clearly a need for us to be able to stick to some standards because that's the stability that our system needs. And our districts can make those changes. They have the ability to do that today.
Thank you. And Mr. Ceballos, the final question in this category goes to you. We in the media often look to graduation rates because there are few other metrics available to really determine student achievement on a year-to-year basis. What to you are the importance of graduation rates, and what do recent results tell you about Wyoming?
Part of the challenge we have with our graduation rates is to look at two things. We talk about graduation rates, but you also align then remediation. And one of the issues that we do have with graduation rate is, first of all, as I talk to teachers, they've convinced me the most important thing that we have to do for our students today is to ensure that they do graduate. If they don't, they're in terrible dire for themselves, for their families, and for the communities that they're living in. So there's no doubt it's important. The problem that we'll have to work through, however, is if to graduate those folks in 4 years, you push them at a level that they leave and they're in a remedial state, you have not done that student any good, because they're going to go out, and the numbers I saw is 80% of our students are having to have some remediation. One of the questions we need to ask is the 4-year standard working. Some students can do it in 3 and can move on. Others may very well take 5. But if you don't have a student that is proficient when they leave the school, they're going out at great risk. And particularly with our students that aren't really oriented towards going on to more education, we need to start looking at a way that we can tell our students, we're going to be with you until you're proficient. And I think if we can do that, we're not only going to see our graduation rates go up. And frankly, I don't care if at a 4-year rate it's 80, but we can get a 5-year rate 90, that's what we should be working on. And by doing that, I believe then we'll start seeing remediation rates dropping from 80 and down to numbers that are also better. So we just need to take a new look at this, but the idea is we need to have the highest standards and then work with our districts to figure out all the ways that they think they can help our students get to that standard. That's what we owe our communities, our students, and that's how we will be successful as a state.
Ms. Balo, your rebuttal.
Graduation rates have been dropping every year for the past several years. What that says is that we're focusing on the wrong things. We're shooting at the wrong target. When we embarked on No Child Left Behind years ago, it was required that all students are proficient in reading and math by this year. I remember I was teaching at that time going, that's not possible and that's not fair. Our graduation rates indicate exactly how unfair that is. As we pull further away as a state from No Child Left Behind, school districts will be freed up to reallocate money to programs. And what I would like to see as state superintendent is school districts solving issues so that it makes it hard for kids not to graduate. I think we can accomplish that several ways. How do we better prepare kids for careers? Through training programs in high schools. How do we better prepare them for college by exposing them to that early?
Thank you. Just a reminder to our audience members tonight, please remember to write down some follow-up questions, and when you have one ready, raise your hand and an usher will come and collect it from you. The next topic of the night is relationships in education. Ms. Balo, the first question is for you. And of course, given your situation right now, it's an interesting one for both of you to answer, but should the superintendent of public instruction be elected or appointed, and why?
Great. I'm asked that question almost weekly. I'm sure that we both are, and I feel strongly that the position needs to remain elected for several reasons. Here's why. Number one, it is the superintendent of public instruction. These are all of our kids. We're all stewards of education, and we need to have a public voice in who sits in that seat. Number two is that the state superintendent is one of the top 5 elected officials, sits on a number of boards that that are outside of the Department of Education. The state superintendent is one of the lone voices for children and families. They serve a niche in Wyoming, and to be able to advocate for that on those important boards that are related to local governments and economic development is very important. 90% of our land trust goes to fund schools, everything from bricks and mortars to books to teachers' salaries. That land trust, the revenues are managed by the top 5 electeds. So again, to not have that voice of the superintendent who is constantly advocating to maximize those revenues and make sure that that funding stream for Wyoming schools and Wyoming children remains constant is very, very important. Thanks.
Mr. Ceballos.
The issue that we need to talk about in this, and we are a bit biased, we're running for the office, so I think you'd expect us to say we like that. But what we have to start asking is, what question are we trying to solve for? If we're trying to make sure that there is no problem at an executive level, you would then appoint a superintendent, because the governor likely would appoint that position, and then you wouldn't have those debates between the governor and the superintendent. But lately, the legislature, again in the survey they did, they said what the biggest problem was identified there was getting our parents involved. And my experience has been in this campaign, I've had to talk to a lot of parents. And I think having this as an elected position provides us with a specific opportunity and a requirement to go out and talk about the importance of education. I think, again, then what we need to do with this is to say, what problem are you trying to solve for? And I think you can then find the best solution.
And Mr. Ceballos, the next question is for you, and kind of keeping along these lines, let's pretend for a moment that sometime within the next 4 years, the head of the Department of Education becomes an appointed position. How does the structure change in your mind? What does the superintendent's job become in terms of basic structure, if it's changed?
Well, clearly, again, there are responsibilities that the superintendent has today that are the state boards. And I would suspect that in that new environment that would change. But you do have to understand that that's going to be one of the dilemmas that the legislature does face if they do make this change. What will you do then? Will you go to 3 so that you don't have tie votes on the state boards? Do you add another person in there? I have to assume that if they do make this an appointed position, that position will not be part of those boards. So that is a huge change. The second thing you know is then you're going to be aligned with what the governor's policies and positions are. That is what we expect in an executive branch, that then you will be looking for where the governor is going, what direction that they would like to have, and how do you then meet that. Again, you will now become more of a state employee, and those state employees they have to be asked to go to the legislature and provide data. As an elected person, it is your obligation to go out and to talk about education and to try to bring, again, those publics in, to talk to parents, to talk to employers, to talk to communities. I think that could very well change because, again, it's going to be now deferential to the governor and the position the governor wants to take. So I think there will be some very different roles in that. And finally, again, what we'll have to ask is then how do you look at the responsibilities that you're going to take on? Will the governor, again, find areas that they think, and we'll bring in other experts to support you? Will you have a department, just like we went through, that there will be people that will be hired to go along with it? Will the structure change? I think it will be a very interesting process if the legislature makes this move.
Ms. Balo.
For the last 4 years, winning has become more important than doing what's right on many occasions in the Department of Education and by the current administration. What we also know is that the legislature has been toiling over the structure, the governance structure of the superintendent's office for the last 30 or so years. There have been multiple management audits done and multiple attempts to restructure that office. It is absolutely a paramount responsibility of the next state superintendent to work with the legislature, the state board, and the public to make sure that the office of the superintendent is structured in a way so that there is tension there, so that the state superintendent can make decisions on behalf of the people, but that those are scrutinized to checks and balances and also scrutinized to other public entities that have a strong stake in education.
Thank you. Ms. Balo, the next question is for you. The Department of Education engages in a multipolar dance of sorts with the legislature and the State Board of Education, among others, in terms of crafting and implementing education policy. How would you describe the quality of that dance at this time, and could it be improved?
So that's absolutely one of the reasons that I opted to run for this office. As I have worked in state government and led in state government, both in the governor's office and at the Department of Education and Family Services. I think I have testified in front of almost every legislative committee in the state. I know that dance well. What I see now, rather than trying to do that dance, is trying to get everyone up off of the dance floor right now, because there is no trust and everyone is beat. Again, it goes back to winning has become more important than doing what's right. So again, I think that goes to what I said just a moment ago, and that is that this office has been embroiled in controversy in terms of governance structure for 30 years, and it is the important responsibility of this administration, of this next state superintendent, to convene people, stakeholders across the board, diverse as they may be, build trust, and collaborate so that we can do the dance, the policy dance, in a way that's productive. Statute is pretty clear. It sets out who is responsible for what. The state board is responsible for this. The state superintendent is responsible for this. The legislature is responsible for this. And it can all work in conjunction, I believe, with a few changes so that the tension exists, exists for robust debate, but that the tension doesn't exist to such a great extent that one administration or several years of lack of leadership can change all of that.
Mr. Ceballos.
What's been very interesting to me is this is an area where I think we can find a lot of common ground. If you think about what's happened this last few years, the legislature really is to a point, and whether you were on the side of 104 or you were on the side of our superintendent, there's been a lot of debate. And I think the legislature is begging for leadership. That's what the problem is. And when you don't have that leadership, then you get very involved in it, because if you're going to spend 1.8 plus billion a biennium on education, you expect to see results. But the legislature also is saying we'd love to have leadership that would bring us together and that we could now trust that we all are going in the same direction. They talk again in the legislature about a shared common vision for the state. I think that there is a true window of opportunity here for a superintendent to come in and really work with our districts to provide a clear path on how to implement the standards that the legislature is setting, and we could be very successful.
Thank you. Just a final reminder to our audience members tonight, please write down any possible follow-up questions, raise your hand, and an usher will come and collect them from you. And Mr. Ceballos, the next question is for you. The next generation science standards have been greatly politicized by the Wyoming legislature, but many districts have adopted them, and they've been adopted by many other states. Will blocking the standards be a disadvantage to Wyoming students? Why or why not?
We need to adopt the standards. And there's a multiple set of reasons why. When you look at what the legislature has done, we've spent $250 million to fund a project that's really science-based at the university. We've spent $150 million on STEM. We all know science is important. The real issue is, though, but we had some problems. We had a couple of tough questions that we couldn't get concurrence from really our communities on. But what's great about the way our system works today is that the local school districts get to implement that. They get to implement the standards. And those standards then do reflect their communities. They reflect the parents, the people that live there. They really have an opportunity to make sure that this is done well. So if we really believe, and we talk all the time about how much we support that idea of local engagement, local involvement, local control, then we shouldn't have a concern that when we pass a science standard, even if it has a couple points in it that you argue about, that we can't work it out. One of those that we have in there that's being debated is evolution. And as I recall, that's been an issue for many, many years, and the school districts have done a very good job. We should have confidence based on that example that they can work through the issues. And when you look at it, we have to have science. My business that I worked with was the largest corporation on earth, and through science and innovation, we were broken up. And it was really a good thing for consumers because that came out. But that is going to be our life. Things are going to change, and science is one of the drivers. It helps our students understand how to take a position, to look at something, to take the facts around it, and to be able to develop a conclusion. It's critical thinking. And at the heart of that, it's one of the most important things, and it's also been required by the legislature. We need to move forward with the science standards. Our students need it.
Ms. Balo, your response.
Here's what I know. More voices need to be heard. I was at a joint education committee meeting, and many, many voices on both sides of the issues were not feeling heard. The issue is not about having standards. We need high science standards so that our children can compete locally, globally, and nationally. This is an issue about people being not heard. And when we have a process that's laid out in statute, and that's the responsibility of the state superintendent to facilitate that, and voices aren't being heard, that's on us. More people need to be heard. More people need to weigh in on this subject. I agree that this has become a vehicle for many other topics of conversation, but the bottom line here is that we need to listen to the people of Wyoming and make sure that we include topics, science topics in Wyoming, and the values of Wyomingites in our science standards.
Thank you. Ms. Balo, the next question is for you. And as superintendent, you'll not only oversee the Department of Education, but you'd also play a key role as one of 5 voting members on the State Loan and Investment Board. What's your approach to improving economic development, and what should the state's role be?
Sorry, I just want to make sure I answer it completely. I'm blessed. I worked in the governor's office for a little over a year as the local government policy advisor. One thing that I did was I worked with communities across the state as they built their infrastructure to get ready for big projects. Some days that looked like being in the fire hall at Elk Mountain, talking about the infrastructure needs in case an oil play came through, or in case coal gasification came through. Sometimes it was working on water tank in Sundance that was sliding off of the hill. And don't get me started on landfill remediation, because I know way more than I want to. As a top 5 elected official, I will be responsible, and I will be a voting member of the SLIB and the other important boards. As the state superintendent, again, that is a very, very important voice that advocates for maximized revenue to fund our schools, and that advocates for children and families and connects our children and families to our local communities, to our industries, to our state government. We have a unique state. We all know that. We have a low population. I have never seen any other state where it works for local governments to partner with state governments, to partner with industry, to see economic development come to fruition at the local level and in a way that helps the state. As one of the top 5 electeds, it's important to make sure that that board is not overstepping, that they are not picking winners and losers. I taught school for 8 years in Hewlett, Wyoming, and I know the needs of that community are much different than the needs where I reside now in Cheyenne, and I'll take that with me. As a SLIB member, I'll make it a priority to go and visit local communities and take a look at their economic development programs so that before they come to SLIB, I will know what those projects look like, and we'll be working together.
Mr. Ceballos.
Over the last almost 18 years, I've worked with economic development as the chair of the LEADS organization in Cheyenne, but more importantly, as a member of many of the local efforts that were undertaken. And part of the reason is oftentimes those required infrastructure, they required broadband. So I was able to really participate in many of those across our state in terms of determining how we could help, where we could talk with them about projects that would be fundable, and then how to move forward with that. The real issue that we have here is that the opportunity that we have to diversify our business comes from these grants. And we've got to know that that is just as important in a small community as a large. And we are seeing that today this is helping us develop infrastructure that then allows communities to grow. And frankly, the diversification is critical for our state.
Thank you. Mr. Ceballos, the next question is for you, and it's along those same lines. As superintendent, you'd not only oversee the Department of Education, but you'd also play a role as 5 voting members on the State Board of Land Commissioners. What would be your philosophy as a member of that board?
Well, again, having been the president of Quest for all of those years, we participated a lot in the different functions of the state boards. The other role of being the chairman of the Wyoming Business Alliance here, you saw the importance of, again, multiple use of our lands and how we can move forward. It's critical in today's world that you bring into that those state boards folks that have had experience, and that's what I have spent really my career in Wyoming doing. We do need to understand that those state boards have some huge roles and that they also are working directly with our communities. As I've talked to the smaller communities, there always is a frustration that the projects don't seem to come their way. One that I just heard about that was very interesting was in Grable, where the mayor there said, we've got office space, and when the lottery came available, we wanted to really host that. We had people that were available, and there were 11 jobs. Those 11 jobs were critical in Grable, and they went to Cheyenne, and the question is there a double standard? What we really need to do is to work with both the legislature and then the Wyoming Business Council on those types of things to understand what are our standards, and as a state elected, then to talk with them about what do you believe in. And certainly you start with, I believe in limited government. Are we getting involved in things that we shouldn't? You also want to be fiscally conservative. You want to be careful that that money is being spent in the right ways. But you also have to know that in our state, we don't have the opportunity for a lot of our ventures to offer tax breaks and to do other things. And so you know the availability of those funds, both for communities and for businesses, are critical, and they can be used in a way that helps to develop, as we have over the last few years, to bring many new jobs to Wyoming.
Ms. Balo.
Approximately 90% of land trust revenues go to fund schools. One of the jobs of the state superintendent and all top 5 electeds is to make sure that that funding remains adequate, stable, and maximized. That voice is very important from the state superintendent. Regarding multiple use of our lands, I'm a lifelong Wyomingite. I'm a 5th-generation Wyomingite. I understand multiple use. My family is all outdoorsmen and outdoors women, and another responsibility is to make sure that that land is maximized for multiple use. Finally, is that partnership between state government, industry, and our schools. This is a wonderful opportunity for the state superintendent and all top 5 elected officials to partner with local communities and look at what the research says about where schools need to be built, about school configurations, and make sure that we're maximizing that as part of our economic development plan.
Thank you. Ms. Balo, the next question is also for you. The current leadership at the Department of Education has shown at times that they're not particularly interested in transparency. What would you do to change course on government openness at the department if you were the superintendent?
Great. That's a great question. And one of the reasons that we're all here tonight is to inform the electorate about what kind of candidates you have before you on the ballot on or before November 4th. This is an important time to talk about education as a national issue. It is, and there are clear and distinct differences between a Republican candidate and a Democrat candidate. The more that we are tied to the federal government, the less we lose our ability to control education locally, and the less we lose our ability to create full transparency in a way that makes sense to all Wyomingites. One thing that I've done at the Department of Family Services is make sure that we have government streamlined, or that we have my division streamlined and my employees streamlined so that we can fulfill public records requests quickly, and so that we have have stakeholder meetings that go above and beyond what the statute asks. Unfortunately, many times with respect to transparency, the statute asks state government of very little. Advertise in a statewide paper, have at least one meeting. What I propose as state superintendent is a much, much more robust form of communication with communities. I've been to every corner of this state over the last several months, and corner to corner, talking to teachers and the general public, business folks, etc. What they would like to see is the WDE and state government reaching out to them instead of it always being incumbent on the community or the person to come to Cheyenne or to come to join a phone call or to find the information themselves. So one thing I've proposed from the beginning is that WDE will have a much greater transparency and a much greater presence at the community level.
Mr. Ceballos, your response.
Well, one of the issues that we do have with transparency is, again, there's this notion that if we want to make a point, then what we do is we say, well, there's Democrats and Republicans, and the Democrat couldn't possibly be as conservative as I am. I think that's part of the problem we're having in this discussion. Instead of being transparent and talking about what the issues are, we're not going to get there. One of the things we're going to have to do as we move into the future is understand if we really do want our communities to be involved, then we have to be as open as we can about the issues that we're facing. Talk about the choices that we have. Talk about the consequences and involve them in that debate. When we do that, we are going to open ourselves up to the discussions that we need to have. And if we make it political, then we can have those, but they're polarizing and they don't get to the point. We need to be able to talk freely, openly, and understand that all of our communities and school districts need to be involved in that.
Thank you. And Mr. Ceballos, the final question of this initial round is for you. And again, it's something that you just alluded to. But what makes you a Republican or a Democrat, respectively? And how does your party affiliation inform or influence what you do as Superintendent of Public Instruction?
What makes me a Democrat? My father was a Democrat. That's where we started. What makes me the person that I am today is 30 years of business, and I would say that I have learned a lot by coming and working in Wyoming. There were always challenges and questions because I was a lobbyist. I worked with those folks as well as I managed a very large company in Wyoming, and we had to work with communities, we had to work with individuals, and so as we started to look towards this, you really do begin to understand that the way you operate with anybody is you listen first. And that's what my success with the legislature has been. We would take our issues to them, and then you'd start to talk about, here's what we're hearing, here's why we like a particular point, here is the way we would advocate for it. But then you also then, if you're a smart lobbyist, you take the other side. You say, I think this is what you're going to hear. These are what people aren't going to like about this. Our legislature is an amazing group of people. They work very hard with a limited staff, but they depend upon all of us to help bring the information to them. When you do that, when you listen, you all of a sudden start to realize that opinions you may have had growing up aren't the same opinions that you take out when you're done with that conversation. Out of that, I've determined I'm a really pretty fiscally conservative guy, and that's because I ran a big company, and we paid a lot of taxes that you wanted to make sure were spent right. I also had to file lawsuits in courts, both in state and federal, because there was tremendous government overreach. And you learn from that government has a role, but you better not be getting in things it shouldn't. So I think our politics can be where we start, but I think our beliefs are from where we come. And I would say, as a conservative business person, that represents my direction very well.
Ms. Balo.
Well, education does transcend political parties in many ways, but there are distinct and fundamental differences between a Democrat and a Republican. And if those didn't exist, we would have met each other in the primary election. What I know to be true is that I have serious concerns and reservations about federal government overreach. And rather than taking a passive approach or thinking that the federal government is part of the solution, I want to make sure that as a leader, we have someone who vigilantly opposes the federal government with respect to government overreach. I have concerns about standards that are shared across states with no changes in content or format when they're adopted in Wyoming. I have concerns about a national assessment that then closes the gap for local control. I have concerns about actions that are taken by the state that tie us closer to the federal government and taking federal advice. I am not about a passive approach to the federal government overreach. We've seen that with the EPA, with wolf and sage grouse management, with the BLM permitting. Education is not immune.
The question is this: do you support the expansion of dual language immersion education across Wyoming? Why or why not?
We have several dual language immersion programs in Spanish and Chinese Mandarin in our state that are working quite well. What the research says about children who are in dual immersion programs is that they do much better on standardized tests and in school. We have a neighboring state, Utah, that is doing a wonderful job with dual immersion programs. That said, that's a local reform. I certainly support local reforms. I certainly support dual immersion programs. And as state superintendent, what I would like to see is a more robust opportunity for the Department of Education to pair school districts that might want to explore a dual language immersion program with other districts that are already doing it.
Mr. Ceballos.
The dual immersion that we have been doing in this state has had great success, and if you look at the results, the folks are touting it as a way to really move our students forward in many ways. The real challenge that we have, though, is how do we do it across the state? How do you work it? And certainly not how do you mandate it, but how do you encourage it? One of the pieces that we will have an ability to do is to start talking about the positives. The state superintendent of public instruction needs to find those positive stories, and this is one of those. And then explain how it's happening, and then we have to start listening, because we're going to have small districts and different sized districts that are going to say, but I don't know how to do that. And without an opportunity to have somebody really there that is going to be sharing that and then opening up those opportunities, as well as talking with people that will maybe have to fund that, we're going to just hear about ideas without being able to expand it. So in our state, it is going to be important, and it would be something that we should be trying to move forward.
Thank you. Mr. Ceballos, the second follow-up question tonight is for you. As superintendent, how would you get parents involved in their child's education who aren't very involved right now?
You know, one of the things that I've been doing for the last 10 years is involving our businesses in talking about this very subject. And one of the things you got to understand is, for instance, we say that we would like to have all of our parents read to our children, and it's absolutely a great thing. But when you understand that 2/3 of our population has a high school degree or less, maybe some of those folks don't feel like they're very good role models to read to their kids. I've kind of called it my Catholic guilt model. What I'd like to do is to provide so many different alternatives. Do you talk to your children when you're taking them in on your pickup truck today? What do you do around the dinner table? How do we provide so many different options that really you finally get to a parent that says, okay, I can do that? And we're going to have to also understand that some of those parents are really grandparents and there are other folks in the community. So I think that the way we do that is really helping our citizens see the options and then asking them and telling them how important they are in resolving that.
Thank you. Ms. Balo.
As a teacher, the kids that had the greatest amount of success were the kids that whose parents were involved in different facets of their education. So we know that that makes a difference, but it transcends education. I work at the Department of Family Services, where I oversee the economic assistance programs. It's a wraparound approach that we need to view with respect to parent involvement. Communities need to be involved involved in bringing parents to the table. I've had a wonderful opportunity at the Department of Family Services and at the Governor's Office to be involved in a literacy push by the First Lady, a literacy across the continuum, and that's had a tremendous amount of impact on our communities. Parents need to be substantively involved, not just peripherally involved. And again, that is a wraparound and robust approach to parent involvement, not just PTA.
Thank you. Ms. Bailo, the third follow-up question is for you, and it's about state standards. The question reads as this: do you believe we have the expertise within Wyoming to write viable, aligned, and exemplary standards, and can we afford this process?
We absolutely have the expertise to write viable standards in our state. Again, we have a baseline with our current standards right now. 90% of states would agree that the standards that we have right now are more rigorous than what we have. They are a starting point. They are not an ending point. We have great models from other states, and we have the expertise in our own state to make Wyoming's standards robust enough so that our kids can succeed and compete anywhere in the world that they want. The second part to that question regarding standards was, can we afford the process? We can't not afford that process. That is the public voice. When the public says we don't feel like we've had input on the standards and we've adopted them off the shelf, we can't not afford to involve the public in that process.
Mr. Ceballos.
And again, this is a place where I think we do have just some differences, because from my practice, you do look at other places for best practices. That's what we've done in business all the time. If we didn't do that, think about what would happen with medicine, where we have standards that truly cross all boundaries. The real issue here isn't that we shouldn't be accepting some other ideas to come in to set our standards, but we equally shouldn't be rejecting them. Our process allows us to take in all of that information, and then we can determine exactly how do those standards align and can be used. When we do that, we optimize our ability then to take our resources where we determine something doesn't fit our communities and modify it so that we then can take that forward to our citizens and then through the process to get it approved. So we absolutely need to use all the best ideas we can find and then determine how they fit for us in the state.
Thank you. And the final follow-up question tonight is directed to Mike Ceballos. Mr. Ceballos, some state superintendents are demanding a cost of living increase from the state. Do you support their request? Why or why not?
You know, one of the problems that we continue to have in this state is the arguments that we're making. The school districts that I talk to really have said that they used their initial funding to increase teacher salaries because what they wanted to do was to get the best teachers that they could find. But then, because they spent it all, then they didn't have the opportunity to give the cost adjustments. On the other hand, we're getting ready for recalibration to come up. And if what we do is through a lawsuit force that, then I think the legislature could also say, I've now been forced to do something that I don't want to do. And then that could be reflected back in that process where we're all looking at the budgets again. The problem is we shouldn't be looking at this in terms of a lawsuit. We should really be talking about how do we develop a longer-term budgeting process that understands that there is going to be issues like this. Do we change it so that we gradiate the budget as it comes in so that it does look more like cost of living increases? We can't afford to have a lawsuit. It'll hurt us all.
Ms. Bailo.
Cost of living adjustment, or COLA, is the let me back up. The responsibility of the legislature is to assure adequate funding to school districts. COLA is one vehicle for doing that, one part of that funding model. That debate will take place in front of our legislature very soon, and I look forward to that debate between the legislature and the school districts, and I look forward to being a part of that debate. Several years ago, when I was at the Department of Education, I managed a grant program for instructional facilitators and was part of that recalibration process for 7 years. I know the jockeying that takes place. I know the robust discussions that take place. And that is the time when we need to talk about the COLA, the cost of living adjustment, to see if we can resolve that and get through it. What I also know is that because of federal requirements, many school districts have had to choose to spend their COLA money elsewhere.
Thank you, and thanks to both of you for everything this evening. Based on results of a pre-debate coin flip, Mr. Ceballos will be allowed to make the first closing statement of the night. Mr. Ceballos, 2 minutes. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you again for all of you to be here. It's a really interesting process. And I started with talking about the 48 school districts we went to and the folks that we visited along the way. Clearly, one of the issues that the new superintendent does have to address is our parents. Our parents are really tired of seeing the arguments continue and not seeing the focus beyond the students. I really believe that this is an area that we can improve. Our parents need to know today what we can do to help them. Because the question is, are your students succeeding or not, and what do we need to do there? The teachers, we owe them the opportunity to be able to do their job. So much time is now spent in their classrooms doing things that aren't instructional, that are there because they have work to do, forms to fill out. And frankly, we change the rules so often that they're really confused and having to spend time just on the numerous changes that come through. Our administrators are wonderful folks, and they have the ability to help set the direction. We need to be listening to them. And collectively, we can set that shared vision and then ask them to help us in how to best get there. We do that in so many other places, and we need to honor the profession. They are the folks that know the best path. Our businesses know that we need to graduate great students because we want those students to stay here. And it is our obligation to make sure that the standards we set are the highest we can achieve and that all of our students get there so that when we have those students come available, they will be the first in line for the jobs we have in the state and frankly anywhere they want to go. And our legislators, our governor, our Board of Education deserve to have a superintendent that looks at them as a partner and a friend, that we can work together and we can achieve the best set of educational success for our students possible.
Thank you. Ms. Balo.
Well, I am that boots on the ground candidate. I'm the teacher candidate. I spent 10 years of my life writing lesson plans, doing bus duty, writing plans with 100-degree fever at 6 o'clock in the morning to make sure that my students were still learning. When I was getting my master's degree, working with teachers to align curriculum with our standards at the time. I am that boots on the ground candidate. I was that teacher, and I've moved into state government leadership for the last 8 years, where I've led a complex group of people, multiple programs, and over $100 million a year, and moved that forward in a way where I've reduced bureaucracy, made government more effective and more efficient, and made customer service to our most vulnerable clients better. As state superintendent, one of the first things that we need to do is set a vision, a shared vision among all stakeholders in education. I propose a 10-year education plan that will transcend elections and transcend politics. We have that in our state for several other areas: homelessness, energy, water. We have those plans, and we can do that in education. We also need vigilant leadership. There are so many cases of federal government overreach, and our next state superintendent needs to vigilantly make sure that parents remain the most important decision makers in their children's education. This is the time to heal a broken system at the Department of Education. I've been there. I've been at the Department of Education, and I've been in state government as a leader. I've led through challenging times, and we can heal that broken system. Now is the time to also collaborate and heal relationships with all stakeholders and move education forward so that our children get the education that they deserve in Wyoming.
Thank you. And thank you, ladies and gentlemen. That concludes tonight's debate. A special thanks to Casper College for hosting. Remember that both of tonight's debates will be available for viewing on trib.com beginning tomorrow morning. Have a good evening, drive safe, and please remember to vote on November 4th. Good night.